Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I am here with Carl Forehand, and we're both just a tad groggy today, but we had a great weekend. And so, is there anything you want to add before we do have a couple guests today?
We do.
So
We need to get to that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Keep me from rambling. The Campfires in the Desert book is out. People still haven't read that book. The normal people that read our books and so on.
Normal people.
Well, actually, they're not normal people. They read anyway. That's another discussion. But I encourage you to read Campfires in the Desert. We've got those as cheap as they can get. Also evolving from religious trauma. Mm-hmm. Both of those books are marked way down, and you can almost get the Audible for free if you have a subscription, mm-hmm. and all those kind of things. So I encourage you to check those books out. And what we need more than anything is reviews. We don't necessarily need the money from those. We'd like for you to read them and tell us what you think. Mm-hmm. And then we get on to that. We did record several episodes, about 6-7 months actually, of episodes about the books and rehashing some of the chapters and things like that. So go back in the podcast for the first part of this year to see those. But now we're doing something different. We're talking to survivors and hearing survivor stories, and also listening to experts in the field of trauma and so on and so forth that relates to stuff like that.
Yeah.
So today we have special guests.
Yeah, we have Steve and Dorthy Halley, and they are from the Family Peace Initiative. And so just to give you a little bit of a background, the Family Peace Initiative is a certified battering intervention program operated by Halley Counseling Services, PA. Presently, FPI operates more than 25 groups in communities throughout the state of Kansas. Along with direct service, the staff of the FPI conducts trainings through workshops and conferences focusing on battering intervention, facilitation, and battering motivation. FPI was born out of the work of Dorthy Stucky Halley and Steve Halley. Dorthy received grant funding for a battering intervention program in the early 1990s. In 2002, significant program changes occurred and FPI was born. A new curriculum was created and a new focus on intervention was undertaken that was researched and evidence-based, which those are a couple of my favorite words, research and evidence-based.
Yeah,
I love
becoming
it.
kind of uncommon.
Yeah, well, and those kind of things, these types of things, trauma-informed care need to be such. But there is so much more to their story, but I want to dig in. So I'm going to stop it there, and hopefully more of their introduction will be spoken about as we discuss. So welcome to the podcast, Steve and Dorthy. We are glad to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you. We are really excited to be here.
Yay, good.
Yeah, I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing right now than doing this. At one time, you couldn't pay me to do this, but right now, and with you guys, as you know, I've driven to Wichita Topeka a couple of times to see you and eat at the great Thai food restaurant that you guys frequent or own or something. You're always there. That's like your alternate office, I guess. But at the Desert Sanctuary, we talk to all kinds of people that are going through all kinds of journeys, but we always want to hear their story because we think stories are sacred and they're important. And when we tell them to others, it does something, and it's something important. And I know you use storytelling, so we want to hear. First of all, we want to hear your story in whatever length that you want to tell it, and you mentioned before that Dorothy wants to cuss, so we'll let her cuss if she wants to. Anyway, so whoever wants to start first, let's go. Let's tell us your story.
Yeah, I just will add it's thank you guys for having us here this morning. It's fun to talk about this stuff, and I really appreciate your interest. Uh, our story starts long before I encountered Dorothy. And Dorothy, I wonder if you'd want to just start from your vision of why you wrote that grant in the first place and what you were thinking about.
Okay. Well, of course, every story, it's hard to know where to start. So
Mhm.
there's always a before.
Mm.
And I would just say that as far as the before, um, my interest in peaceful interactions, I'm certain, comes somewhat from my childhood, being raised in a Mennonite home, and my father took a very strong pacifist stance.
Mhm.
And I admired my father, and he really not only publicly took that stance and paid the price for that, but he also lived it. And so, with that, what I would say is that I had the good fortune of being the director of a domestic violence shelter starting in 1986. And after about the fifth year, Tina walked into my office, and she was the seventh victim from the same offender in a 5-year time frame that we worked with. And so I knew I did not want to work with this man's 20th victim. I felt like what we were doing was such important work with the women and the children. But I also knew there was nothing that I would do with Tina that would stop me from having to work with his 20th victim.
Mhm.
And so it was that and the unfortunate circumstance where one of the victims that I had worked with for several years ended up getting killed by her partner, Nancy Covey. And those two incidents together, I think, really culminated in me saying, okay, this work is important, but I've got to add this other dimension. And that's why I wrote the grant.
Mhm.
So it was that where, um, Steve, you came into the picture. I mean, was that where like you started working with the men, the men that were doing the battering, just to follow the timeline?
Dorothy had been, got the program going and had a couple groups happening long before I had met her. Uh, we were both going to the University of Kansas School of Social Work, getting our master's degrees, and I didn't know anything of Dorothy before we showed up in school, and I hadn't really met or noticed her during class until one day. We had this assignment where we were supposed to research and get up and present social work in the workplace kind of things, and there was social work in the hospital setting, social work in education, social work in the childcare, and on and on and on. And I was going to present social work in the criminal justice and youth criminal justice because I was a probation officer for youth in the early '90s, and this woman got up to give a presentation on social work and domestic violence. And I wasn't interested in domestic violence because I was a youth worker. I was always focused on young people. And I had no idea what domestic violence would have to do with me working with youth. That was an adult problem. It was a relationship problem. It was anything but a child problem. And so I'm not even paying attention while this lady's up there giving a presentation on social work in the domestic violence world. But at some point, I kind of looked up from my doodling and I just noticed that this lady really knew what the heck she was talking about. And she was a very good presenter, and she was poised, she was confident, and yeah, and I found her to be really attractive. And I was like, how on earth have I missed this lady in all of my time here at the University of Kansas? She's been in my class all this time, and I hadn't really noticed her. It was like she just kind of came out of the woodwork. And so all of a sudden, I became so interested in domestic violence. I thought, man, if that's my ticket to meeting this amazing person, then I'm going to try to learn what I can and have somewhat of informed conversations. And as Dorothy and I got to talking about and meeting and getting acquainted, I discovered that I had a very long learning curve in front of me regarding domestic violence, because Dorothy knew what she was very knowledgeable, and all the things that I thought I knew were so inerrant, right? Were so missing the mark. And Dorothy's been patient with me through the years, kind of coaching me and nurturing me along the way on, the complicated dynamics of domestic violence and how it does apply to justice-involved youth and
Yeah.
troubled youth in 100 different ways. And I was so limited and naive, I didn't understand that.
I was going to say, because, do you find that most adults that are are battering, that there has been some sort of violence perpetrated on them as a youth? I'm just curious, like statistically.
Well, I had a history of working in the wilderness camping system, therapeutic wilderness camping system down in Florida. And the kids who came to those places had trauma histories just beyond the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And so understood at some level, what they were bringing when they arrived at our camp, in our facility, in my group. I knew that trauma was a significant part of what brought them to that place. I wasn't very knowledgeable about how to intervene with that. I was pretty naive at that time as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when Dorothy and I joined forces and started doing the groups as well, I started kind of seeing that the men in our groups were really just grown up, troubled kids who had had trauma histories and then turned into adults. And then somehow we shifted from being empathetic about their stories to kind of blaming them for their horrible behavior. And so we had a lot to learn to try to figure out how to apply the trauma histories that were normal inside of our group room.
Mm-hmm.
And to a large degree, our field was kind of ignoring that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Dorothy.
well, Steve was just very complimentary of me, but the reality of it is that his work with the youth and focusing on learning how to work with folks who are troubled and have had traumatic experiences was incredibly valuable.
Mm-hmm.
We went to developing a curriculum that was focused somewhat on being responsive to their trauma. And we realized we needed to do that. There's a lot of different perspectives on what is the most effective response in battering intervention, but the vast majority of those doing the work have known for a long time that a very large number of those that they serve have experienced childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Now, different folks see that differently, and partially because if you don't open the doors, if you don't want to hear about the trauma, many folks won't talk about it. But if you figure out a way to make it possible for them to explore and become self-aware, you'll hear it from just about all of those that we serve.
Mm-hmm. I came to you guys through ASDAC, another group in Kansas. So many things happening in Kansas that are good.
Mm-hmm.
And they referred me back to you, and the Family Peace Initiative, the the I want to call them workshops, the things you do, the training
Mhm.
you do is way more than just a group. It may be called a group, but it's way deeper than that. And most of the people that come to the training say, I wasn't expecting this. And even Rebecca from ESDAC says the same thing. I wasn't expecting that. It surprised me, but it went way deeper. And it got to those places that it needed to get to. And it certainly did for me. And that, I'm trying to recall the exact name of the training, but it's the River of Cruelty. It's cracking the code. So the things you do, it's kind of all put together
Mhm.
um, in the Family Peace Initiative training.
Yeah, we have three trainings that we call the facilitator training series. And then we have an additional training that's we call it cracking the code, which is really about battering motive, which has been Dorthy spearheading that not all who batter in relationships are the same. In fact, they're quite different. And if we treat them all the same, then we actually can be unintentionally creating dangers for victims and survivors. Uh, but the training is really connected to, Bessel van der Kolk wrote his book, the Body Keeps the Score.
Mhm.
Alice Miller talked long before Bessel, before I got acquainted with him. And she was talking about how, the traumas and the things that happen to us get stored in our bodies. And then it comes out sideways in our behavior, in our language,
Yeah.
and in what we don't say, it's really interesting. And so when people come to our training, I think the surprise is that our approach helps people to kind of locate what's being stored in their bodies.
Hmm.
And I can remember the first time I really dove into this kind of work, I was stunned at how much emotional energy was being stored I was like, what is happening to me? This is just so out of the norm for me. What is going on? But I'd just been storing up this emotional energy for 30 some years. And I ran into people who could help me connect with that and kind of cleanse that and kind of allow it to move. And that's a significant part of the healing process. And that's what happens when people come to our trainings. We're trying to show experientially how to apply our approach with, who you're working with. Laura, if it's you and your students in the classroom, or Carl, if it's you and the groups that you're working with. And in order to learn that, we kind of have to experience it,
Experience it. Yeah.
get some empathy about what's
Hmm.
going
Mm.
to happen when we ask these questions and open up these little doors.
Yeah. And empathy is a good word, by the way. Um, you define cruelty as so part of the things you do, the river of cruelty. Um, you define cruelty as the intentional infliction of pain and suffering on another person, the blatant disregard of another person. So that's the starting point, right? And as Laura kind of mentioned, you need to explore how you were cruel, but also how cruelty happened to you, right? How is that the starting point? How is it helpful?
It's
Talk more
really
about that.
interesting. I think Alice Miller was the writer who really introduced us to the concept of cruelty. The word cruelty was not being used in the field of domestic violence, and it commonly would be used with extreme cruel behaviors that would hit the news, like somebody locking up victims in their basement or burning people with cigarettes or those kind of extreme types of behaviors. And Alice Miller started talking about cruelty being any intentional infliction of pain and suffering. And I started thinking about that. Dorothy and I had these conversations at late at night, in the family room, just trying to understand what happens if we apply the word cruelty in domestic violence, because everything that is a domestic violence behavior, the name calling, the physical abuse, the emotional, the gaslighting, it's all examples of intentional infliction of pain and suffering. And when we started understanding this and started applying the term cruelty, so for example, I had never thought that, that me making a decision to just go play golf in the morning could be an act of cruelty to Dorothy if I blatantly disregard her, which is the second definition, right? This blatant disregard. If I make a decision that impacts Dorothy, and I'm not taking into account what she wants to do, what she's interested in doing, what she hopes to do, what her dreams are. I'm just making a decision that impacts her, and I don't think about her, then I just blatantly disregarded her. And suddenly it's not locking up people in basements for years, but it's simply making a tee time at a golf course without taking her interest into account, which, by the way, is John Gottman's definition of trust, right? The knowledge that one's interest will be considered. And so I see his coinage of that definition as kind of the antithesis, the other side of the coin from cruelty, the blatant disregard for another or the intentional infliction. And so that was really eye-opening for me when I read Alice Miller's work that, oh my gosh, I have tons of cruel behaviors that I had never thought about as being cruel behaviors, and had never risen to that level before. And it changed our conversation about domestic violence.
Well, one of the ways it changed it was that we, as humans, know on a gut level that we can be cruel. And in the domestic violence field, one of the things that we're constantly trying to assist the participants with is their tendency to minimize their behavior or to deny their behavior and to blame others. And when you use the term domestic violence, what so often happens is that they can say, oh, well, that does not fit the Kansas legal statute. What I did does not fit the statute of domestic violence.
Right.
And rather than constantly having that conversation where we're trying to get them to not do so much denial of how harmful their behavior was, by changing the terminology from talking about domestic violence to talking about cruelty, it's like it happened overnight. We no longer were in conversations about what's the statute. What's the statute's relevance, and is this domestic violence? Because every human knows that they have the capacity to blatantly disregard.
Yeah, that's significant. That's really significant.
Yeah. So I'm loving this conversation and trying to wrap my mind around all of it, just because as we're talking, I can feel the cruelty that was done to me. I can also recognize the cruelty that I have perpetrated on others. Before knowing what you're talking about, before you come to that realization, is cruelty always blatant and intentional? Do you see what I'm saying? So if I haven't done the work of my own trauma, so in my case, I had to deal growing up with a lot of passive aggressive behavior, a lot of being ignored and things like that. And so the people in my life that did that, I don't know that they knew that they were doing it. Would you still call that blatant and intentional?
And that's a great question, Laura. And Alice Miller kind of speaks to this, and we've incorporated this into one of the axioms of the river of cruelty. And that if we take a look, one of the ways we can discover how what happened to us is affecting us is, how we are treating other people. Alice Miller says that if we don't process and heal and recover from the things that happened to us, then we do kind of one or two things, or a combination of the two. One is that we either heap the cruelty on ourselves. We will drink, we will drug, we will isolate, we will not chase our dreams, we will sabotage our own relationships, we'll heap it on ourselves. The other way is that we will give it away to others. And so I don't want to feel mad. And so here I'll make you
Hmm.
feel mad by being passive aggressive. Or I don't want to be afraid. So I'll make you be afraid by being angry and over the top in my behavior. And so people may not be thinking, or aware of how their cruelty that they've experienced is
Hmm.
impacting the way they're engaging with others. But Alice Miller says it's like a big flag waving, right? That in our program, when people are acknowledging the cruel behavior that they've used against their partner or their kids, then what they're telling us is that that's evidence of what happened to them long before they were cruel to anybody. And so part of the process of healing is being accountable for their
Right.
behavior currently, but
Hmm.
also going back and being accountable to heal what happened to them long before they were ever cruel to anyone. So me not being aware that I'm blatantly disregarding Dorothy does not make it not cruel, right?
Right.
I'm still being cruel to Dorothy. I'm just not having to think about it, which is my luxury, right? What a bonus for me,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's important to note that it doesn't have to be both the intentional infliction of pain and suffering and blatant disregard. It can just be blatant disregard. And
Mhm.
we can blatantly disregard people without being aware
Yeah.
initially that
Yeah.
we're disregarding them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
if we look at it later, or if we really look at that behavior, oh yeah, I didn't even think about Steve when I went to the grocery store and picked up some stuff that I knew that I needed. You
Mm,
know, that's a disregard.
mm,
And once we start really diving into that, we start noticing how we blatantly disregard our partners
mm,
in so many different ways. Um, and that's something that creates some commonality and it often creates a doorway then for us to be able to connect with the participants. And they can start looking at their behavior, not this horrible, awful thing that they got charged with, perhaps.
Mhm.
They might not be ready to go there, but they can start by looking at how can they show up different in their
Mhm.
daily lives.
Yeah. Cruelty has become um, most admired in parts of our world, yeah, especially in the United States.
mm.
I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to talk about the Family Peace Initiative's approach. And you mentioned axioms. There's you call it the river of cruelty, right?
Mhm.
And we just, with your help, wrote an article for the Alliance
Against seclusion and
Against
restraint.
Seclusion and Restraint that explains that if you want to go over there and get that. But Steve and Dorothy have videos on YouTube about it. But let's talk. Can we talk about that in whatever format you want? But kind of give us an overview of what's the steps, what's the axioms, what's the principles behind the river of cruelty.
Well, the river of cruelty was really born out of a lot of our conversations, but actually, when it got first put into practice, I was serving as the director of the Victim Services Division over at the Office of the Attorney General here in Kansas. And so Steve and his staff here at the Family Peace Initiative uh, really worked hard at developing this and implementing it. So, Steve, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, just real quickly, first of all, I smile because all these things, you know, Dorothy and I, you know, got into these conversations late into the evening, trying to understand and trying to make sense of this. And what are we seeing in the room? And what is Alice Miller and other people telling us about trauma and how's this work? So the river of cruelty, in the end, uh, it was a kind of a model of how cruelty gets passed from person to person or from generation to generation. And if I am experience cruelty from my parents, uh, then that comes from some place. And so it's not like my dad or my mom just grew up and you were born and decided one day to be mean to Steve or to be neglectful of Steve. Right? There's a source for that. And
Yeah.
Alice Miller says that the source doesn't really matter. It doesn't do me any good to blame my mom and dad, and my mom and dad, it doesn't do any good for them to blame whatever happened to them. That it's a process of how do you get out of this river? How do you get out of this dynamic that's going on that can be generations deep?
Hmm.
So it starts by experiencing a form of cruelty. And so the ACEs study is remarkable in so many ways, but the original study looked at 10 items of cruelty that can happen to people, right?
Hmm.
And the river of cruelty, if we were to do this with you all, we could make a list of probably 50 to 75 experiences that people can have that was a blatant disregard or the intentional infliction of pain and suffering.
Hmm.
And so it's much, much bigger than the 10 items on the ACEs study.
Mhm.
Although the ACEs study showed, right, it was part of the evidence of how trauma affects us over the lifespan. And so once we understand the cruelty is much bigger than those 10 items, there's probably 50 or so or more, then cruelty always it creates an adverse feeling, right? Whether you're 2 years old or 15 years old or 35 years old, when someone is cruel to you, you've got a feeling about that. And it's not a pleasant feeling. It's either, being afraid, feeling weak, feeling inadequate, feeling worthless, feeling irrelevant, right? There is feelings of anger, feeling of being afraid, feeling of being sad. And these feelings are the product of the cruelty. We call them the adverse feelings. They're the feelings that we wake up in the morning hoping we don't feel today, right? We don't want to feel them. They're not pleasant. They're not desirable. And it usually means we're going to have to tend to something that we don't want to have to tend to, right? And so the first two boxes, the river of the cruel behaviors that we experience, and the feelings that happen at the moment that we're experiencing the cruelty are the keys. Because if you're lucky enough, like I kind of believe Dorothy was, right? If you're lucky enough to grow up in a family where people are really emotionally expressive and mature and aware, then people would meet you and say, "Oh my gosh, of course you feel afraid and small when you get bullied on the playground. Come here, let me help you understand that that's a normal feeling. You're supposed to feel that when someone mistreats you, and I'm going to sit here with you. We're going to help you learn how to experience those feelings, and then we're going to help you to be safe. We're going to go and work on how to create." If you have somebody who can mentor you as a little person to understand those feelings and validate them, then the cruelty kind of evaporates and you get out of the river through this acceptance of, oh, this is a difficult part of the world of being a human. But if you don't grow up in that space, right? If you don't grow up in a place where your feelings are welcome and you have mentors teaching you how to feel and what they are, what's going on, if you're not safe to talk about it, then you have to adopt defense systems, right? You have to adopt ways to get away from those adverse feelings. And that's really where the trouble starts. And Dorothy, do you want to just take it from there and how the trouble starts at that point?
Well, yes, with the adverse feelings, it's so much fun to do this whole river of cruelty in a group because they start seeing it and they think that they're all the only one or that they're different. And then by going through this, and like Steve said, this list of cruelties, just really, they start noticing. We just ask them how many of those they can relate to. And if you have 40 up there, it's very common for many of the participants to have 30 or more. But what those, as Steve mentioned, what those cruelties create is some real feelings. Kids have feelings about what happened to them. They have defense mechanisms that help them. But when we start talking about feelings, pretty soon the group members get on a roll and they're talking about feeling helpless and hopeless and worthless and sad and afraid and mad. And we tend to, in our work, focus on mad, sad, glad, and afraid because there are very restricted emotional um, expectations put on us as humans. So, but it's beautiful when we start asking them about what do they feel when these things can happen. And they didn't have to talk about just themselves, but they just talked about what kids might feel. They come up with a list, 50 or so different feelings, often very quickly. And it's always the same ones: stupid, dumb, worthless. The list, we all have probably at some point in our lives felt those things.
Yeah.
But it's like Audra Fullerton, who used to work with us, talked about kids are like scientists. And as scientists, they end up with these beliefs about themselves and they start checking them out. And, is it true? I must be worthless. And then if they get other circumstances happening with more cruelty, pretty soon they're believing that I am worthless. Well, we can't just sit in worthless without becoming reactive to that. So fortunately, there are things that people can do to help soothe themselves and to cope with those really nasty feelings that they're going through at the time. And those are our defense mechanisms. And we think that with those defense mechanisms, we're going to be able to manage. And thank goodness. We often think of, for example, kids ending up numbing their pain by using drugs or alcohol as really problematic. And it certainly can be in the long run. But in the short run, thank goodness they had something to be able to help them not experience that just 24/7. So we make this list of all the defense mechanisms, and we all have them, whether we become too invested in work and live our life for work or for exercising or for getting good grades. And I mentioned those things because those are the ways that often people don't recognize as having a negative impact on the youth. It's like, oh, well, yes, they went through this horrible thing and their brother is really struggling. But this student is doing fine because they're showing up in class, they're doing their book work, they're just really a pleasure to have in school, and we're not noticing perhaps that they are just as driven by their trauma. So those defense mechanisms, as good as they are, they come back to bite us as well.
Yeah. They may be shut down, right? They're emotionally shut down and things like that. Yeah.
Right.
The thing about the defense systems that I love to say is that whatever ones we pick, we only pick them because they work. They're only doing, and their only job is really one thing, right? And that's to help us avoid and get away from these uncomfortable emotional experiences that no one has helped us learn how to experience.
Yeah.
And so we have these defense systems. If it doesn't do that, if it doesn't help us get away from our feelings, we don't use them. But the ones that we use, they are effective in that one thing, but they're problematic. They bring with them a host of difficulties that we tolerate
Mm.
because anything would be better than us feeling these feelings that we don't want to feel, don't know how to feel.
Yeah.
Well, that's the word that came up for me was shame. And so, like, when you can workshop with people and go and make this list, right, of all these adverse feelings and defense mechanisms and things, and people can go, I see myself in Carl's list. I see myself in Dorothy's list. I see myself in Steve's list.
Mhm.
I mean, my body is like reacting in this moment. Like it just brings that level of shame, thinking that I'm the only one
Mm-hmm.
that is struggling with this right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that there is a connectiveness within our humanity. And that's such a beautiful thing when you can bring that shame to, a manageable place for people.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
And real quickly, shame is just an example of heaping the cruelty on ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the choices. If we don't process what happened to us, we're either going to give it away to others or heap it on ourselves. And in our group rooms, we'll see some people who are battering, who are just carrying the boat of shame. They just got it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other people that, don't even think about what they've done to other people. They're just quite happy to give it away to others,
Yeah. So these we have these adverse feelings. We create defense systems, and you also mentioned the shadow message, the I am messages. It goes along with shame, by the way. It's not that I did wrong,
Right.
I am wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So those negative shadow message. And I don't want to get you out of order or anything, but you also talk about golden messages, shadow messages that we get from the enlightened witness, from the special person in our life that helped us and was beneficial to us. So, what's next? Let's move on down the river of cruelty. Where do we go from there?
Yeah.
Well, once we have developed, as Steve mentioned, a defense system that works for us, then we use it. And unfortunately, we depend on it.
Mm.
And it becomes used a lot. And when, for example, a teenager is trying to numb out some horrific event that they experienced, and they turn to drugs or alcohol, they never intended to become addicted.
Mm-hmm.
They never intended to get a DUI.
Mm-hmm.
They never intended. So any defense system that we have developed, it can end up having these unintended consequences.
Right.
And so we make a list of unintended consequences. And if you think of just one defense system, drugs or alcohol, and think about the negative consequences, pretty soon you have on the list broken relationships, homeless, financial ruin, getting to see the kids only every Wednesday night, on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And with those unintended consequences, those confirm the beliefs that we heard when we had the adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
So now when they have no job and they're divorced for the fourth time and they're thinking about their life, it's like, well, yeah. I am one.
Yeah. Right.
I am not capable.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
The interesting thing that we're working on and at the moment that's captured our attention is this idea that ultimately there's only really two beliefs that drive our behavior. And Carl, you brought up this shadow message, this I'm worthless, that I'm nothing, that I'm stupid, and if I don't want to be stupid, then one of the ways I can do it is try to make other people feel stupid and give that away. Or I'll try to just show how amazingly smart I am and trying to go over the top with all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the other way that I could do it is that the other belief, what you were alluding to, is this golden shadow message, which is given to us by people who just loved us, not because we did anything special, but just because they saw something in us that we were having trouble seeing in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that message is quite different, right? My family was very academically oriented, and I had struggles with academics for a lot of different reasons. And so I really felt less than, inadequate, stupid in my family because I was making terrible grades while everybody else was blowing grades out of the water and going on to, advanced education. But then there was people in my life like Dr. Lentz, who was our neighbor a couple doors down, who just adopted me as his golfing son. And he made me feel so special and valuable and important in my own way by just his behavior. And so all of a sudden, this enlightened witness, as Alice Miller calls them, give us this alternative belief about ourselves. In one space of my life, I'm getting this, oh, I must be stupid and worthless because I can't make good grades in school. But then I encounter Dr. Lentz, and he's going, oh, no, you're special and valuable and just important in your own way. And I get to decide which belief I decide to live out of because I have evidence of both.
Mm-hmm.
But the cool thing is that Dr. Lentz didn't have to do that. He just saw something in me that I was having trouble seeing in myself. And so he was like, no, maybe you can't see it, but Steve, you're wonderful. You're special. You're really important in your own way. And I love you. And that, looking back on it, gives me the choice between living out of my shadow message or living out of the golden shadow message that Dr. Lentz gave me. And it's really, really interesting because when people are really pursuing living out of their golden shadow message, cruelty evaporates. It's really fascinating for us when we talk with people in our groups about, gosh, when you were violent, what did it feel like your partner was saying about you? It felt like my partner was telling me I'm a loser and a terrible man and stupid and worthless and all this stuff. Well, great. If you just believe the person who loved you, that you were special and valuable and lovable, how does someone who's lovable handle this difficult situation that you were in? And the thing that they say more than anything, the most often, is they'll say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that I would have never done that. I would have never done the cruelty that I, imposed on my partner.
Mm-hmm.
And they start thinking about, if I am worthy, as my grandmother told me, if I am worthy, as my uncle or my stepdad or my stepmom told me, how would I handle these difficult situations? And they begin to practice living out of a different belief altogether, and they will choose different behaviors instantly. It is a really remarkable kind of moment when they realize, oh, I have the power to change my behavior, and my behavior is evidence of what I'm believing about myself. And I would argue those are the core beliefs that we have to be digging into is, what do I believe about myself? And why am I inflicting all this cruelty on the others? And what is my behavior saying about what I believe about me?
Mm. I was thinking, as you were talking, Steve, like my grandmother on my mom's side, my maternal grandmother was my, I believe, golden witness. And it's just so interesting because I try very hard to be that witness to my students because of how I felt growing up, being called dummy and, stupid and things like that. But as you were talking, I'm like, it's interesting that I want to give to my grandchildren, to my students, what I didn't have, but I still struggle. I still struggle with not heaping that on myself.
So,
Yeah, really, like you gave me something I need to do some homework on because why am I still struggling to believe what my grandmother has believed about me all along?
Mm.
We've used that word belief. You use it several times through there, and that is a key part of the river, right? Is that we develop beliefs from the river. That's where we get to, and beliefs beliefs come from dysfunction more often than not. They come from trauma. They come from cruelty. I think that's revelatory, to use a big word, for people to realize that a lot of these beliefs I have about myself and the world and how things work come from this thing you're talking about, right? Dorothy's about to say something. Go ahead.
Several things. One, I think what you're talking about, Laura, is what we call being at that painful shift place
Mm,
where we go along in this river of cruelty and we can see it in the participants where they at one point finally think, why is that so hard for me to believe what my grandmother said? And they start exploring all of the negative that they have bought into. And one of the things that I don't know if you've ever seen the video about the bicycle that is built,
The backwards bicycle,
the
the backwards
backwards
lane
bicycle.
bicycle. Yeah, beautiful.
But in that video, what he talks about is he can know that he has to turn the bicycle opposite because it's built to where if you turn left, it goes right or what have you.
right.
He can know that, but to do it is another thing.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And we talk about making that shift
Mm,
is like swimming upstream. It
mm,
is hard, especially when we first start trying to swim upstream, but it gets easier. But knowledge does not equal understanding. And once we realize that, we can give ourselves permission to, we will never totally get rid of those negative messages, but we can befriend them and we can keep that from overtaking our lives and remind ourselves to go back to what was it that grandma said.
yeah.
And what's really cool is when we're around other people who can remind us of that as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Really good.
Steve and Dorothy, that you guys have become an important part of my life. I mean, through the other organization, this has I went in trying to find some knowledge and came out changed. That's powerful, and I like when that happens. It is, as you described, a painful shift. It's not easy, and I don't think any worthwhile work is ever a breeze. It takes hard work to get better. But we want to thank you guys for being here and spending some time with us. And Laura, any quick questions, things you want to close?
I don't have any questions, but I definitely want to continue the conversation. I think there's more to unfold here. I have learned a lot, and I feel like it's given me a lot to think about for sure.
Yeah.
The work you guys are doing is really good work. From what Carl has shared with me and just what I've heard today, it is really good and important work. So thank you for what you do. How can people get a hold of you?
Dorothy, how can people get a hold of you? You're a tough one. We have to have things like this so we can have quality time together. This is really
I relate. We can relate.
So I'm listening carefully, Dorothy. How can I get a hold of you?
Well, our office phone number is 785-350-2858. And that's one of the ways that people can leave messages for us, or lots of times you'll catch us here. We also have a website, www.familypeaceinitiative.com. And Steve's email is steveh at familypeaceinitiative.com. And mine is Dorthy H. Dorthy with just one O, however.
Mm-hmm.
Dorthy H at familypeaceinitiative.com.
Yeah. And if people are interested in learning more about how we think about things or our approach, you mentioned earlier our YouTube channel, Carl, and I appreciated that. We have like approaching 80 different short, 10, 12-minute videos, kind of talking about a lot of the different subjects that we've just touched on today. And people can kind of just peruse those and kind of explore and learn and kind of, uh, help feed the curiosity if people are interested in learning more.
So anything you guys didn't get to say, there's a burning thing you need to say before we get out of here. Did you get most of it out?
Yes, I can think of one thing.
Okay.
And as I replay the conversation, we talked a lot about our work regarding battering intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to know that when it comes to training, we're getting demands for training that are far beyond that. And that's one of the things that really excites us is the river of cruelty is really something that is pretty generic.
Right.
All of us as humans
Yeah.
can experience that.
Yeah.
So some of the groups that I think really have found our work to be something that they can apply very readily are teachers,
Mm-hmm.
are victim advocates,
Mm-hmm.
are some ministers,
Mm-hmm.
different folks who are dealing with people who are struggling.
Yeah.
It gives them the opportunity, which is kind of ironic. My work started in working with victims, and I never thought that I needed to use the same skills in working with those who batter.
Mm-hmm.
As it turns out, both of them have experienced a lot of trauma, and that's a great place to start. So the other thing is that we've developed a youth program over the past 5 years and done much more in that area. One of the things we've always heard from those in our group is, oh, I wish I would have heard this when I was in junior high. It would have saved me a lot of pain and agony in my life. And so to be able to be providing that service to justice involved youth is really exciting. And the other area that we have been doing quite a bit of work in is within justice involved facilities, within prisons, within jails, both for youth and for adults. In fact, Steve, I think that when it came to the development of the River of Cruelty, you and Janae were kind of honing that when you were doing the work in the Topeka Correctional Facility with the female inmates. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Janae and I one day got on a chalkboard after a group. The women in the Kansas women's prison, the Topeka Correctional Facility, it was a whole different level of trauma experiences that we walked into. And those women informed us on the roadmap of the River of Cruelty while they were just sharing their stories with us. And it would be really remiss not to give them credit for what we learned from them that applied to this river. The one thing I would like to add is that Brene Brown says a really nice thing. And she says, what's the difference between those who are kind of the wholehearted, she calls them, and the other people. And she says, the difference really is, do people believe they're worthy of love and belonging?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to develop that belief that we're worthy of love and belonging if we haven't had the experience of being in a world of love and belonging. Mm-hmm. And so this process of the River of Cruelty and understanding our own personal beliefs. Anytime I believe I'm not worthy of love and belonging, there's my shadow message. I can find it right there, and I have all kinds of reasons to explain to you why I don't belong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if my golden shadow message is true, well, of course I'm worthy and special in my own way. And, then the more I live out of that, then it becomes easier for me to believe that I'm worthy of love and belonging, and my life changes
Mm.
Mhm.
just by simply examining, my own beliefs about myself. And Brene Brown says it beautifully. And I just wanted to add that piece to it. That it's evidence. If we're not believing that we're worthy of love and belonging, that's evidence about something that I believe about myself, which is connected to something that happened to me long before.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could
So
add
good.
one thing going out is just this, that not a cruelty is not just violence, that cruelty is neglect,
Mm.
and all of those things that all of us experience. And I believe your training, even though you may be in a group with better intervention people, it was still very relevant when I went through it, and it applied to me, and it helped me understand how to do things for others that are helpful,
Mm.
um, for their well-being and the recovery and so on. So we want to thank you guys for being here today. I know that you've got another place to be today. I wish we had more time to talk, but until next time, I want to remind the listeners to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.